So for whatever reason, Candace Owens is able to determine whether or not Jeffrey Epstein might have been working for another state, but Pam Bondi, they're just going to have to keep surmising about whether or not Jeffrey Epstein. When you respond with, well, I don't want your support or gaslighting, you've lost touch a little bit with your audience.
So recently, Candace Owens went on Tucker Carlson's podcast lambasting President Trump for covering up the Epstein story, gaslighting us all over it. And she gets into what she thinks is the most plausible reason that is happening. And what I thought most interesting was when she gives advice to President Trump over how to deal with this better. So let's get her take on this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Right now, I'm obviously very much interested in the Epstein case. And so that's where I'm focusing my attention, the Epstein case.
What do you think that was? The Epstein case?
I would say Israel, obviously. And again, I'm so tired of us being gaslit. It's the dumbest gaslighting of all time. On record, okay, when Pam Bondi said, I can't even, this was just a moment where I was like, okay, like, F you guys hate us. Like, you have so much power. Why don't you just come out and say, nah, boo-boo, you can't touch us, F you. I would rather you do that, right?
Yes.
Than put on this pretense of a conference, and then you've got Trump over here being like, does anybody still care about Jeffrey Epstein? And then Pam Bondi is asked the question, was he working for another country? And she says, we don't know, right? You don't know? So in my series, I'm like, maybe we can help them. Maybe we can help the deep state figure out who Jeffrey Epstein was working for. Here is Ari Ben-Menashe, who was a Mossad agent, who is on record, literally recorded. Let's listen to him tell us about how Jeffrey Epstein was working for the Mossad. Okay, Ari Ben-Menashe worked for Mossad, and he's saying that Robert Maxwell brought him to Jeffrey Epstein and said, let this guy in. He's going to be involved in weapons. Hey, Pam Bondi, you might have missed this one. Okay, you might have missed this one. Then you go to another person who is on record, who is Viktor Ostrovsky, who defected from the Mossad notoriously. The Mossad admits he worked for the Mossad. He wrote a book, By Deception or By Deception Only. He says that's the Mossad motto, which they obviously do that. That's why they execute all these false flags. And he told everybody the truth. He has said Jeffrey Epstein was working with us. So for whatever reason, Candace Owens is able to determine whether or not Jeffrey Epstein might have been working for another state, but Pam Bondi, they're just going to have to keep surmising about whether or not Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, she's so right. This gaslighting has had several phases. It's a grand cover-up, and first Trump said, why are you asking about that? Then he said, hey, it's boring. Then it's a Democratic hoax. Somewhere in between all that, hey, if you're one of my former supporters still wanting to know and get to the bottom of this story, you're no longer one of our supporters. And hey, this is a Democratic hoax like Russiagate. And then let's pivot to Russiagate and not talk about this. And hey, here's these MLK files we have in our back pocket this whole time ready to release to try to take attention off of this. Look, she is right. Epstein has many connections to Israel and Mossad. When it comes to Ari Ben-Menashe, who she just referred to, he was a former Mossad asset. And Israel has denied this, but here's the crazy thing. They say this guy, he worked in Israeli intelligence, but he was just a low-level translator operative. But Ari Ben-Menashe has shown his passport in court that shows that he traveled to dozens of countries, and that presumably was on official business. And he said Epstein was working with intelligence. Candace has talked about this before too, but obviously that we know Epstein surrounded himself with Douglas Leese and Adnan Khashoggi. And those figures were involved in arms trafficking and money trafficking during the Iran-Contra scandal. He also was good friends with Ehud Barak, who stayed at his home for prolonged periods, visited him 30 times after the first child molestation conviction. So yeah, that is where the signs point, and she's not wrong for talking about it and throwing Pam Bondi under the bus for not even researching that or caring about it when it's easily evident to people that have looked into this case for more than 5 minutes.
Who is, with Ghislaine Maxwell, her father being Robert Maxwell. One of the biggest lies, by the way, that's told, and I debunked this in our third Epstein episode, is the idea that, Robert Maxwell, they admit he was a Mossad agent, but Epstein didn't know him. The story they try to tell now and fashion to the public is like Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein met after her dad was dead. That's just false. Again, Ari Ben-Menashe tells a story of being brought into the office and being told that Epstein was going to be brought in. This was the Iran-Contra scandal. So since the 80s, Jeffrey Epstein has been working for Israel.
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence that does connect to Epstein with figures close to Iran-Contra, people like Douglas Leese and Adnan Khashoggi. And the thing that is missed so much in this story is how heavily involved Epstein was in money laundering and money transfer activities, just as much as it seems like he was involved in child sex trafficking and child molestation. It's something completely lost from the story, but yeah, a lot of accounts have Epstein meeting Robert Maxwell in the mid-'80s. Not 1991 after he died, and that death, we won't go down that rabbit hole, but he certainly died mysteriously. And it wasn't as if he didn't know who that was. Epstein was acutely aware of who Robert Maxwell was long prior to when he first showed up in public with Ghislaine, which I believe is around 90 or 91.
I don't know how I know that, and Trump and Pam Bondi don't, but they got to bring me in. Like, I might have some evidence here. Right. It's like, so we're getting to a point now.
You're going to have tough confirmation hearings.
I just want them to say F you. Like, seriously, that would feel better at this point if they just came out and said, F you, na boo boo, you can't touch us. We rule over you. Ha ha. That would feel at least authentic. Going back to the Taylor Lorenz thing, I'd be like, I really don't like that, but at least it's authentic. And I know you mean it and it's true.
Yeah, I would feel more comfortable to them if they were more convincing in their lies. This whole thing has been a tailspin on the part of this administration. They're not alone. It's not like Biden was forthcoming on this, but they've contradicted themselves in this whole zany tale about why they can't release the Epstein files. It seems like they're much more willing to let the world burn to the ground than to release the Epstein files. So, I'm with her on that. It's just crazy to have Pam Bondi answer questions saying, yeah, the Epstein client list is on my desk under review by order of the president. Oh, but no. I was just talking about the Epstein case in general when her office didn't do any kind of follow-up clarification on that once it aired live on Fox News, to when she also said, oh, hey, we have thousands of hours of Epstein molesting children. And then that became, oh, no, that was just child porn. Well, how are those two things confused? It's so absurd. They can't get away from this because Americans just see right through it. The inconsistencies are just too evident and glaring.
All totally fair.
Yeah.
Does any of, to the extent that we can project forward and guess, does any of this come out? To a greater extent than it has? Is there ever like a public resolution of this story?
No, because Israel's controlling our government. So no, the answer is no. Trump is powerless against him. We haven't had, I don't think we've been a sovereign nation since they shot JFK. And when I say they, it's like people online say, what do you mean by they? I'm talking about Israel. I don't want you guys to read in between. I'm talking about Israel. So let's stop making that a taboo subject because they've gone mask down. Everything they're doing is demonic. I want nothing to do with it. I will never support Israel into the future after what they've done to these children. The starvation campaign. I don't care. Please write your article. You've already written them all. I don't know what you could add about me. But I do not support Israel. And I don't think that Jewish Americans should support Israel. And I hope that they're now having those conversations. I see many of them recognizing that they have been propagandized into believing they have to support this demonic state.
Yeah, it's a propaganda machine, and she is right that the Israel lobby has incredible entrenched power in the United States, kind of boasting about how they kind of own 350 representatives in Congress or so, and their voting patterns. And hey, that's one of the biggest bipartisan efforts coming out of Congress is aid to Israel. If you want to see true bipartisanship, and by true bipartisanship, I mean when the party of stupid and the party of evil collaborate to do stupid and evil things, just take a look at the records of votes for aid to Israel, because then you'll see it all over the place. As far as JFK, as far as Israel's involvement in that, I don't think we have full answers on that. But what I will say was JFK wanted the precursor to AIPAC. It was called the AZS, American Zionist AZC Council, to register under FARA as a foreign entity, a foreign lobby like every other country has to do. And he was trying to shut down Israel's acquisition of nuclear weapons from the United States in what was known as the Domina Project at the end of his life. And hey, he was killed shortly after that. So if you don't think that, the documents tell the full story, which I don't either. I don't think duplicitous things would be written in any document. You might question that, but she is right about Israel's influence in this government and Trump's kind of complicity with it all. While the genocide's taking place in Gaza, Trump is talking about, hey, how big of a war hero Netanyahu is. And by the way, Knesset, you should drop all the corruption and fraud charges against him. And he's joining Netanyahu to shelve U.S. foreign policy aims like diplomacy with Iran in favor of war with Iran. That's the tale of the Israel lobby in the United States right now, and it's a bipartisan effort.
And that's in large part thanks to their birthright trip. Yeah, that mask down moment for Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL when he got caught on the hot mic, it was released. He didn't know that he was being recorded. And he's like saying that they've got to get TikTok under control. He's like, we have a generational issue with TikTok. We need to do something about this like what we did with birthright. What does that tell you? That the entire purpose of that birthright trip, telling every Jewish American, you forget a free trip to Israel, was to propagandize you into believing that you have some affinity with this made-up country in the Middle East, like in 1948, that you have to, react when something's happening to them, or you have to look away when they're doing things that are so obviously wrong and demonic.
This is the Israel first mentality, and it's a plague. It's a plague that consumes our political system. There's no getting around it. I'm so glad that more and more voices are waking up to that. And voices on the right, like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, are waking up to that. This isn't the same world as it even was 5 years ago or 10 years ago when you see Tucker Carlson up in front of a mass audience in Turning Point USA talking about this stuff and how it's not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel and their evil doing. And he didn't vote for that, and to get applause from Charlie Kirk's audience, the sea change is coming, guys. This is unavoidable.
And so I'm hoping now that we're getting to that point where people can recognize that whether you're Black, you don't have to agree with BLM, whether you're Jew, allowing your identity to shape your morality is problematic, okay? And Israel, in and of itself, is a demonic nation. I will never support Israel, right? So I went from working for PragerU to I will never support Israel. So that's how much the scales have fallen from my eyes about what they are involved in. And if this isn't your wake-up call to just look at the footage of what they are doing, they're playing Hunger Games and like throwing food at them and then killing people and seeing who survives. It's just at your fingertips. You have to take a look at what Israel is doing.
Indeed. I mean, over the last few months especially, they're setting up aid stations in which Palestinians that have been, thrust away from their homes because of this insane war, which isn't even a war anymore because Hamas isn't even fighting back. They haven't fired a rocket back into Israel since April, and before that, it was sporadic anyway. They're setting up aid stations so that the IDF can pick off innocents when they get in line for that aid. And if you don't believe that, mainstream news articles are being written about that. And Israel hasn't even disputed it in some cases because it's caught on film and too easy to see. So yeah, this is just demonic in the worst and most destructive ways, and we can't just tack it all on to isolated incidents or crisis actors. That stuff's part of a propaganda campaign to shove this under the rug and hope that average Americans don't care. But I'm glad some do.
Last question. Do you have advice for the president, whom you know? You said you spoke by phone. I know you've been a supporter of his for a long time, but do you have advice for him now?
Yes. My advice to him would be my advice to very many people who I've seen become very big and then get very small or have their supporters turn on them, which is don't ever get to the point where you think you're smarter than your audience. And I think that for Trump right now, and I'm speaking specifically about the gaslighting of, are we still talking about Jeffrey Epstein, and then saying, I don't want any supporters that are still into this. That means that you see yourself as a king and you've stopped listening. You're not responding to the movement anymore. And what made us get behind you was that despite the fact that we knew you were this boisterous billionaire, was that you had a way of communicating with and understanding how people felt, right? The blue collar worker, how that person felt, the person that's listening to you, the truck driver, the plumbers. And when you respond with, well, I don't want your support or gaslighting, you've lost touch a little bit with your audience. Just don't never think that you're smarter than your audience. I'm constantly getting feedback from my audience and trying to figure out what they're interested in and how I can be better, even if it's slight tweaks of things like, oh, I don't like the way the audio sounds or this. And they like that. They know, because then they know that you care, and I do care. And I think that Trump's message over the last few weeks with the Epstein fumble, as I'm going to refer to it as, makes people think that he doesn't care.
Yeah, Fumble might be putting it lightly, too. Obviously, she is irate about this whole thing. She's covered it in many videos before this, but yeah, she's right. It's the tribal mindset that allows people to just shelve their typical inclinations as far as morality for the sake of tribalism. It's letting your identity and your tribe control your politics, and I think that's wrong-headed. I think she put it there perfectly, and that's what the Epstein cover-up is. It's exactly the type of cover-up that now is being enacted by Trump, a guy who it would be so impossible not for him to grow to believe that he's smarter than his audience. You know, much of his audience and much of his base lauds him as like a uniquely heroic figure. He does have the biggest cult of personality of any politician probably in my lifetime, and maybe including Reagan. Reagan was certainly more popular electorally, but I don't think he even had the cult of personality behind him like the most zealot Trumpians, right? So how could Trump, a guy that, you know, leads with his ego all the time, can't stop talking about how great he is and how smart he is and how weak his predecessors were, grow to that point where you just believe you're smarter than your audience? I do think this cover-up is part and parcel of that in many regards. I mean, look at how many times they've shifted the narrative and changed the goalposts as far as why this cover-up has to happen. One phase I didn't mention earlier was, hey, we're just going to seek grand jury testimony here from this judge that had a historical track record in New York of opposing Trump. That's where we'll go. Even if that would have worked, it would have resulted in months-long delays, documents that would have had redactions, and the whole time it was privy to authorization by a federal judge, which it didn't get granted. And I think the only reason Trump and his team kind of invoked the grand jury testimony was because it was a red herring. Look, we know a lot of evidence exists that hasn't been unveiled, and yeah, Trump thinks he's smarter than us, that, you know, even people taking a cursory look at this wouldn't, you know, be able to know that, let alone the people that have written excellent books about the Epstein case, like Whitney Webb. One Nation Under Blackmail, Volume 2 is excellent. That's where I've learned much of what I know about Epstein and the Epstein story. But we know that wire transfer information exists. $1.5 billion of wire transfers from Epstein to people of prominence is held by the Treasury Department. They won't unveil it. Ron Wyden's seen it and tried to get the Senate to subpoena it and to release it to the public. And he's not just being an opportunist. He's a Democrat, and a lot of Democrats are being opportunistic about this, but he talked about this last year. He talked about this when Biden was in office. And unveiling that is following the money. That's where I think we can see the truth. We also know that search warrant information that was taken from Epstein hasn't been divulged to the public, despite, you know, some descriptions of some of those things. We know that evidence withheld from the public during the Ghislaine Maxwell trial wasn't shared. We know that Ghislaine Maxwell herself wants to testify right now. They don't seem to want to hear that at all, even though the victims want justice here. You know, Mike Johnson, the speaker, said, hey, I ended our session in Congress because it would be painful for the victims to get to the bottom of this Epstein case and for us to have a vote on it. No, that would be painful for the perpetrators, and this was a child sex traffic ring. So yeah, I'm where Candace is. I think she put so many things so well in this video, and there's an awakening on the left and the right. I don't care which political party would benefit more from the release of these files. I just want answers. I want to know especially about Epstein's intelligence connections, because all circumstantial signs point to a Mossad connection. And that's just the truth. And most people that have studied this will tell you that. If there's not a smoking gun, there sure are a lot of breadcrumbs heading right to Mossad headquarters. But I do want to hear from you. Let me know down below, is Candace Owens right about this? Is there any way that Trump can get around this, that it won't affect him and the rest of his agenda? Or do you think the Epstein cover-up will do that? Let me know in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Tucker as well. He did a great interview here with Candace. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can help support me and the channel. And in return, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.